So did your mother teach you about being a woman? You know, do you remember her going through the menopause?
Nope.
Or did she talk to you about her breast cancer?
We're talking about how frank can I be on here? Can I be very frank?
Say whatever you want to say.
Yeah, she had a Catholic upbringing. She was my dad was her only boyfriend, so she tells me, or told me. She had a very, very strict Catholic upbringing. So she, was she open with me? I remember asking about using tampons when I was about 13, and she told me I couldn't because it would cause me to lose my virginity. So no, we didn't. And that's, it sounds ignorant now, but that was her belief. That's what she'd been taught. So no, we certainly didn't really talk about women's issues. And actually she died when I was 22. So we didn't really get to the point of having those conversations. So she was 54. Don't really ever recall her talking about menopause. I know when I look back, I suppose it's very, very hard to know, Julie, because she was ill. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 47. She'd gone through all of the radiotherapy and the treatment and the mastectomy and things. And then she was clear for a few years, and then it came back as secondary bone cancer, and she was very ill for about 12 months. So between 47 and 54 when she died, which is kind of when I would have expected, looking back, with the knowledge I have now, she was probably perimenopausal or going through menopause. There were so many other things going on. I don't know that she'd have been able to pick out what, whether this is menopause, is it the cancer, is it stress, is it what, it was very hard. So we certainly didn't talk about it. I learned nothing really about what was to come. The only thing she did do, actually, she did forewarn me about my period starting, because she was very young. She was 10, I was 9. So we had the conversation about periods very, very early, because she'd not been told. She was the oldest girl of as I say, quite a strong Catholic family, and she wasn't told about it, and she really panicked. She was terrified when her periods first started. So she did give me the benefit of that bit of knowledge, but I don't think she could have told me, Julie, because I don't think she would have known what it was all about anyway. And I don't think women nowadays even know much about menopause, certainly from my experience in the last 3 or 4 years of delivering training to thousands of women now. We just don't get taught about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why what you're doing is so very important, isn't it? So obviously that must have been incredibly devastating, because your mum was so young. What happened after that, when you left home? Tell us your story up till now, Bev.
Okay, so I actually, I got married very young. I got married when I was 20 to somebody who was quite a bit older than me, and spent 7 years in quite an abusive marriage, that was a real shock to the system. As I say, my parents were quite volatile, but there was no violence. Ended up in this marriage where physical violence and mental abuse as well were quite prevalent. And I ended up, it's strange actually, I kind of knew not long after we'd got married that I'd made a mistake. And he was in the Air Force. We were actually up in the Outer Hebrides. We were living in the Outer Hebrides. So I had my 21st birthday on the Outer Hebrides, which, looking back, it's a beautiful place to live. And we're visiting again this year. But it was I felt very isolated, very alone, was miles away from my family. And we didn't have a phone. It sounds bizarre now, but we didn't have a telephone in the house. To call my mum and dad, I had to walk down the street to the telephone box. So I had sort of 7 years of this, and I kind of knew I should have left earlier, but my mum was ill, and she absolutely loved my first husband, had no idea of what was going on behind closed doors, and I didn't want to tell her, because I didn't want to lay that level of worry and fear on her. So I kind of lived with it and put up with it. And then I ended up pregnant with my daughter, and I was kind of, okay, well, this changes things now. We've, got to make a go of it. and it wasn't getting any better. So I actually ended up walking away from that marriage with my daughter when she was 14 months old to become a single mum, which was quite challenging because I'd literally gone from home to being married. I had never lived on my own, let alone lived on my own with a baby. So that was quite interesting. And yeah, a couple of years later, I met my husband that I'm married to now, and life changed completely. And we've kind of, I think we're coming up to we've just had our 27th wedding anniversary. So that second one worked out a lot better. I do joke with him though. I say, you know, second time around was so much better than the first. So the first time's going to be brilliant, isn't it? But it's with a wink.
Well, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I mean, dealing with all of that and having to keep it a secret must have taken everything really. And then going from the Outer Hebrides to being a single mum and moving on from there. I mean, how did you start to heal from all that had happened, Bev?
You know what? I don't know. I think I look back now and I think I'm just naturally probably quite a resilient person. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't think I've not had any counselling or anything like that. I've had lots of coaching in the last 5-6 years, but never any counselling. And I don't know that I don't know that I've gone through a healing process. I think I'm just quite resilient. And maybe, who knows, maybe it's all still in there somewhere. And at some point in the future, it's going to come pouring out. But I guess the healing has probably come from my husband, Mark. I think he's just a very stabilizing force and massively supportive in anything I do. So I guess that's probably been part of the healing process without me really consciously knowing that that's what was happening. But I do look back now and I think, goodness me, I lost my mum at 22, went through that sort of horrific time in the marriage, walked away single parent with a baby, then sadly lost my dad. Not many years later, I was only 29 when I lost my dad. And I look back and I kind of do think, goodness me, how did you cope? But I think sometimes you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and getting through it. And maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know. I think I probably came from a kind of stoic upbringing, maybe, where you just kind of got on with things. And there's a saying is now, life's not very fair. And I think we were brought up that, life isn't fair. You don't expect it to be. Because I think, maybe you'll agree, maybe you don't, but I think sometimes if you think everything's going to be rosy, when something bad happens, which inevitably does in everybody's life, if you have this sort of what I would call toxic optimism, this idea that everything's always going to be rosy, you're not prepared mentally or emotionally for when things go wrong. So I am an optimist. I wouldn't call myself a pessimist at all, but I think I'm probably a realistic optimist. I think there's always going to be times in your life where things go wrong, but I also believe there's always a shining light at the end of it. There's always the light after the darkness, and I think that's probably where my resilience comes from. I don't know where that's come from. I guess it's probably a throwback to my parents, because I think we get most of our sort of character traits from them. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, and I it's an interesting expression, toxic optimism, and I think you're absolutely right. I remember my dad saying to me, "Life isn't fair, Julie," and I used to hate it. I used to really get upset.
Why isn't it fair?
Yes, it is, Daddy. It is, But actually, he's absolutely right. It isn't fair, but it's about who you're being, in the circumstances that you have, isn't it? And finding win-win situation and something that does work and a way through, like you say, to the light. So how on earth did you get to set up the company that you have now? There's obviously a gap between. Yes. So what happened, Bev?
Oh, well, put it this way, Julie, I never ever had on my career trajectory that I was going to be a menopause trainer. I can honestly say when I was sitting as a teenager, writing down my life's goals and dreams in my little sparkly notebook, this was never on the cards. I actually spent many, many years working for the MOD. I worked for the Air Force for 32 years, and I enjoyed it. It was, I had lots of different roles within that time, and met some amazing people. But I wouldn't say I was ever massively driven in the job. It was a job. It was a source of income. And I had no intentions of ever leaving. It was a great lifestyle. Lots of sort of perks, I guess. It was a very relaxed place to work. We had nice flexible working, and we had a gym on hand. It was all very nice, but not massively rewarding or fulfilling. But my plan was to stay there till I was in my 67th year, when I found out I was going to have to work till 67 to get my state pension. That wasn't a problem. And then I turned 55 years ago, and I had my first hot flush on my 50th birthday, along with the big badge that said I was 50, just in case I forgot. And I had 2 years after that of pretty horrific menopause symptoms. Not that I knew that many of them were related to menopause. I knew when the hot flush kicked in, this was probably the start of it. What I didn't realize at the time was that anxiety and increased stress and memory issues and word recall problems and migraines and achy joints were all going to happen as well. So I had 2 years really of feeling pretty rubbish. Can't even begin to tell you how many times I ended up in my boss's office in tears, convinced that I was failing in my job, that I was no longer competent, and he must have regretted the day he took me on for the job. And it was just it was like my confidence just had gone through the floor. And after 2 years, I thought, I can't deal with this. There was loads of other stuff going on in my life, Julie, much like lots of women of that age have got lots of things going on. So I didn't have my parents, so I didn't have that elderly parent caring responsibility. But my father-in-law was dying of cancer. My mum-in-law she's 90 next month. So, she was in her late 80s. She's in Kent, we're in the Midlands. There's quite a long sort of space between us to get to see her. My sister-in-law, my husband's youngest sister, had gone into a diabetic coma, and when she came out, she was brain damaged. There was a lot going on. We'd moved her into the house, the bungalow right next door to our house, so that we could look after it. Well, my husband more than me, but so he could be there to look after. And you can imagine all of this kind of pressure, I guess. And it was like this tinderbox of stress just waiting to explode. And I thought, I'm not coping. Mark was coming out of the Air Force after 38 years. We didn't know if he'd get a job. It was just, when I look back, talk about resilience. I lost my resilience for those 2 years, without a doubt. And I ended up asking the MOD for a period of 12 months unpaid leave, because I thought, well, that will help Mark. We'll know what Mark's job situation is. I kind of knew my sister-in-law wasn't going to live much longer, or my father-in-law. And it was like 12 months will give me some breathing space to get my life in order. Because of financial constraints, they turned it down. So I was left kind of feeling like I didn't have much option but to resign, which I did in March 2018. And by a weird twist of fate, and there's an irony here that won't be lost on you, I got contacted by Air Command, which is the Royal Air Force's head office, a few months after I'd left work. There's a huge backstory here, which is going to not make a lot of sense if I don't tell it, but we don't really have time. But suffice to say, I'd done lots of research into menopause over that 2-year period. And I'd got a bit of a reputation as something of a menopause specialist. So I got this call from Air Command, from the HR manager at Air Command, asking if I would put together a couple of workshops, one for managers and one for female colleagues, to talk about the impact of menopause in the workplace. So I actually ended up delivering these workshops on World Menopause Day 2018, which is the 18th of October. So I'm literally coming up to 3 years of delivering menopause training, because when I left those 2 sessions, which were so well received, and I got such a sense of satisfaction out of chatting to, I mean, I had 30 women in this room and listening to their stories and how clueless they were about how to get help and the support. And I could recognize so much what I was going through in a lot of the women in the room. I just thought, this is wrong. We should know more about this. This is a natural part of a woman's life that we're not told about. So I left that day, drove back home from High Wycombe with a million things going on in my mind. And that's when I decided I would start seeing if there was more of a need for menopause awareness training in the workplace. So since then, that's what I've been doing. And I've worked now with oh gosh, I wouldn't even like to begin to count, dozens of companies, and spoken to thousands of women, managers and employees across the board to start to get the conversation around menopause going within the workplace, because 80% of menopausal women are working, and women over 50 are the fastest growing sector of the workplace. We need to know what's going on because we're under an awful lot of pressure, and menopause is just another stress that kicks in and can tip the bucket over. So that's what how I ended up doing what I'm doing.
Amazing, Bev. That's fantastic. How important do you think it is that men have an understanding of menopause?
Oh, I think it's vitally important. I think it's vitally important that men understand everything to do with female reproductive health, not just about menopause, but there's still so much stigma and taboo around women's health issues. We don't talk about periods, we don't talk about all of those hormonal changes, and let's face it, men and women, we're built differently. We have different mechanics going on inside, and for women, our hormones fluctuate much more than men's do. I'm not saying that men don't have hormonal issues, some do, but they don't tend to have that erratic change that we have at different stages in our life. And we add pregnancy in there, and the emotional turmoil, I beg your pardon, well, there is that as well, but the hormonal turmoil that's going on. So I think, my experience, I have to be honest, when I first started doing this, I made an assumption that men wouldn't be interested, that they'd be dismissive, that they'd ridicule, and there are some that do, sadly. But that's not been my experience on the whole. My experience has been that men are engaged. They want to know. They're not going to experience it, so they want to learn. The problem is, as women, we don't know enough to be able to communicate and tell them. So we have this breakdown in communication. And I think a lot of men will joke and not intentionally belittle, but they will make comments that feel derogatory and will feel belittling. And it's not necessarily done from a place of ill intent. I think often it's a way of talking about something that they're ignorant of in a way that they don't want to cause offense, so they'll make a joke. Yes. Often the joke comes across as offensive by accident, but I think in order for them to feel more confident, excuse me, to talk about women's issues, we need as women as well to talk about them more openly and not brush them under the carpet. So it is vitally important that men understand.
Absolutely. And I actually love what's on the background behind you. It says making menopause mainstream. I think that's just absolutely hallelujah. So for any women who are watching, who they might be dreading the onset of menopause or going through it right now and really, really struggling, what advice would you give them, Bev?
Okay, I think first of all, don't dread it. Don't dread it. It's not an illness, and that's not to say that the symptoms aren't real or that they aren't likely to make you feel a bit rubbish. And I know, you know, my own experience, I thought my symptoms were horrendous. I've spoken to women who've had much more severe symptoms than I have. But I think I'm a great believer that you get what you focus on. So if you think you're going to have a miserable menopause, chances are you will, because that's your expectation. So changing your mindset around what to expect. And I think that comes from talking more openly about it and demystifying it and kind of making it more mainstream so it's not such a problem. And I think menopause is a little bit like labor. You know, you only hear the horror stories, you don't hear the easy stories. For many, many women, they will go sail through their menopause, you know, with barely a flutter of an eyelid. They'll just go back, oh, so that happened. Okay, let's move on. That's not the case for all women, but I think we can certainly think about how we think and feel about menopause. So changing the mindset is massively important. Accepting that it's a change that is inevitable and trying to fight it is energy wasted. You know, put your energy into the freedom that this next chapter brings, because you're not actually burdened with a lot of the baggage that you've carried in your younger adult life. You don't have to worry about periods, don't have to worry about getting pregnant. You don't, you know, some of those things go, and you've almost don't have to worry so much about what people think anymore either. You know, we've got this real freedom, we've got experience and knowledge and wisdom, and in lots of cultures, older women are revered. They're the hags and the crones and the witches, you know, and these are all sound like derogatory terms, but for me, they're really empowering. God, I've got all this wisdom and knowledge. What am I going to do with it in my next chapter when I don't have to worry about raising a family or, you know, being that nurturing, caring, looking after everybody else except myself person? I can actually start to focus on me. So for me, it's a really empowering time. You've just got to get through this kind of ugly little chrysalis in between the caterpillar and the butterfly, and it's a bit ugly as we're sat in it, but oh, look what comes out the other side. So getting the mindset in place, I think, is key, because once you're feeling better about the process, you can cope with the symptoms better. On a practical level, go and get HRT. It's not as bad as people think. In fact, the benefits far outweigh the risks for most women. It's been demonized over the last 20 years. Most of it is unfair. It's poor reporting. I hear so many women, myself included, who've gone down that route and it's changed their life. That's not to say it's a magic, you know, pill. It's not a silver bullet. You've got to think about possibly focusing more of your lifestyle habits and think about your nutrition. Are you getting enough exercise? You're getting enough sleep? Are you managing your stress? You can't, it's a full package. So there's lots you can do. It doesn't have to be a miserable time. And once you're feeling a bit more educated about what it's all about and what's going on, you can make much more informed choices about what you want to do.
Yeah, I love that you said those things, you know, and hopefully that kind of reframes it for some of the women that are listening. Obviously, you've got a book out. You've got lots of resources available, and I will stick all your links below this
Thank
video.
you.
So please check Bev out. So I know you've got amazing testimonials. I've read them on LinkedIn, fabulous. And as you mentioned, you've worked with thousands. You've lost count of the amount of people that you've worked with. Obviously, you know what you're doing. That's clear. But why would you say that you're the person to work with, Bev?
Gosh, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think because I've done the research, there's huge amounts of information out there. And it took me probably 2 years to find good quality, accurate information and cut through all the noise. People often say there's not enough information about menopause. I fundamentally disagree. There is oodles of information out there. It's confusing, it's contradictory, some of it's over medicalized, some of it's too clinical, some of it's downright misleading. So trying to find accurate, well-resourced information is difficult. I've done that work. I've done it over the last few years. So I guess I've kind of hopefully saved people time. And that's really what the book is about condensing everything that I've learned into a practical guide. I I think also I've got that lived experience. I've been through it. So I empathize and I understand how difficult it can be for working women as they're trying to navigate this transition and navigate all of the other stuff that life throws at you. Because like we said, right, earlier on, stuff happens, life isn't fair. It throws us problems, and it is a struggle. And often women, especially in that midlife bracket, I mean, menopause can happen at any time in a woman's life, but that sort of 40 to 55-year age bracket seems to be a massive change for a lot of people. There's so many other things going on, with children. If you've got children, you may have had children late. It's quite hard to manage young children and menopause, and people underestimate how long it takes for the body to get back into place after a child, and then you've got menopause on top. So I guess I've got lived experience, but I'm also very pragmatic about it, Julie, because my experience isn't your experience, and it's not anybody else's experience. So in terms of why would you work with me, I guess because I am pragmatic and I'm not a one size fits all solution. I feel very, very, very strongly that choice is massively important. And I've done enough research to know now that there's no one solution for every woman. And I've got a range of different options. And I guess I bring that kind of helicopter view, I guess, to the people that I work with, whether I'm coaching or even when I'm delivering training. It's very much focused on choice and giving people the tools and the information they need to be able to go out and find the right solution for them. So I don't know, I'm British. It's very hard to blow my own trumpet.
I think that all sounds perfect. So there's one final question I want to ask you. When you're no longer on this planet, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, that's a good one. How would I like to be? I think I'd like to be remembered as having made a difference in some small way. If I could make a difference in a big way, that would be a bonus. But if I could just have made a difference to a few women and they felt that they've been more able and more confident to cope through this time, and then maybe hopefully inspired a few people to take a different track, that would be a good result. Also, if I can manage to stay married to Mark for the rest of my life, that would be a good one. I haven't got any plans for that to change.
I love that. It's been such a joy talking to you, Bev. So all there is for me to say is, Bev Thorogood, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Julie. It's been a pleasure.